Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. Over the next half an hour, we're going to bring you a roundup of all the significant developments to have taken place around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Israeli Prime Minister makes a sharp U-turn, now says he's in favor of a two-state solution. Netanyahu's strategy angers many. UN levels accusations of genocide and war crimes at the Islamic State, cites evidence that extremist groups' fighters sought to wipe out Yazidi minority in Iraq. Amid anti-terrorism demonstrations, Tunisian Prime Minister Habib Essid assures a full investigation into terror attack on the museum. 9 people arrested in connection with the attack that left 23 people dead, including 20 foreign tourists. And US Federal Reserve modifies stance on interest rates. Rates have been kept at a record low of 0% since financial crisis in 2008. Fed to wait until it sees further improvement in the US labor market before rising rates. Our top focus on the program this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has watered down his pre-election promise not to allow an independent Palestinian state. In an interview to a US television channel, he said that he preferred a two-state solution, but circumstances have to change. His pre-election comments had drawn sharp criticism from the US. White House said that they are evaluating the path forward with Israel.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu steps back on pre-election promises, softens on Palestine issue. He said, and I quote, "I do not want a one-state solution. I want a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution, but for that, circumstances have to change," unquote. Now that's a complete reversal of what the returning Israeli Prime Minister has told his supporters days before the election, that he would not allow a Palestinian state. Following Netanyahu's flip-flops on the issue, the US says it is reassessing the path forward with Israel.
What is apparent is that in the context of the campaign, and while he was the sitting prime minister of Israel, he walked back from commitments that Israel had previously made to a two-state solution.
Netanyahu's comments refusing a Palestinian state has drawn sharp rebuke from the United States and from the international community. Now he looks at a patch-up.
There's an unbreakable bond between Israel and the United States. The president said that. I've said that. I think that is reflected in the relationship between the president of the United States and the prime minister of Israel.
US President Barack Obama had criticized what he called Netanyahu's divisive rhetoric during the closing stages of Israel's parliamentary election campaign. Demand for a Palestinian statehood has been the cornerstone of Obama's Middle East policy. Israel-US relations have also been strained recently following Netanyahu's controversial speech to the US Congress on Iran nuclear deal. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Joining me for a chat on the program this week is Professor A.K. Pasha, School of International Studies, JNU. Professor, thank you for joining me on the program. Let's analyze what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said. In fact, before the polls, he said that he was averse to a state of Palestine. And after the elections, he says that, he's going to work on something, on a two-state formula. Was his statement before the election just a poll gimmick?
No, he has been consistent as far as his party's opposition to a two-state solution is concerned. Because the entire global approach, the Quartet and EU, America, Russia, China, UN Security Council, all have been pushing Israel to accept this two-state formula. But on ground, the Israeli governments have been consistently refusing. They have not considered any of the major points which the global community wants on this issue. So in that way, it is a reiteration formally that Israel is no more interested in a Palestinian state as far as his party is concerned.
But what has changed before and after the election? Because now he's made a sharp U-turn.
Yes, and this has to be seen in the background of his strained relations with the United States, which has been pushing on this issue, although on ground nothing much has changed. But the Israeli society, his supporters, see him as a defender of Israeli security, a strong man as far as Israel is concerned, given his approach on the Gaza invasion last year. Despite international condemnation, he went ahead and took a very strong position on Hamas. So in that way, he has been consistent as far as Israel's security approach is concerned. But for the United States, I think there are two options open. One is to wait and watch how this unfolds within the Israeli political system. Number two, America, as you know, is engaged with other Western partners, Russia, China, on the nuclear issue of Iran. So they don't want to rock the boat as far as Israel is concerned, because he has been a very strong critic of Obama's policy on this issue with Iran. And after that, probably the United States might consider approaching the United Nations on two counts. One is to say that the United Nations is committed to the two-state solution of this issue, and alternatively table a resolution saying that pre-1967 borders could be the basis for a Palestinian state, which would become very difficult for any future Israeli government to reject.
Indeed. But what does it say about the people of Israel? Because after the Prime Minister comes out and says something like this, he's voted back to power. So, I mean, what do you have to say about that?
This is, for the outside world, is very difficult to understand. But one has to keep in mind the fear psychosis of the Jewish people who have suffered for centuries at the hands of the Europeans and various other people. So they want to make sure that any Israeli leader who stands up for Israel's security would get the support. And also, secondly, there has been a rightward shift in the Israeli political spectrum. More and more Likud and religious groups have become dominant, including the Russian immigrants who take this line. So in that way, including the Lieberman-led party. So all of this has pushed the right agenda, as you see the right parties in Europe also raising their head on immigration and so on and so forth. So in that way, the Likud has been trying to put forward the extremist agenda, and that has increasingly more and more supporters, and the moderates and the left and Labour Party supporters are on the decline, as it is obvious from the
Indeed.
30 seats which Likud won, and 23 for the Zionist group, and about 12 for the joint leftist and Arab parties.
Sure. Now after Prime Minister Netanyahu's victory now in Israel, does the US change its strategy, or does it employ a wait and watch kind of an approach, or is there is it going to take on a more hands-on approach in the region?
No, first, as you said, it will be wait and watch, because Israel-American relations are too strong, too deep, and all pervasive. It goes beyond the White House, State Department, and beyond the Congress also. As you see, the Israeli lobby is supported,
strong, yes.
Not only strong, but also bipartisan support. Both the Republicans and the Democrats support this unequivocally, and although there might be some rumblings. But the United States, as I said, would wait and watch for the timing, and then its priority is to concretize the nuclear agreement with Iran. And after that, and also secondly, it is to combat the Islamic State. This is a major security challenge, not only for the United States, but also to its allies in the region, and in the long run, even to Israel. So in that way, I think the American president would keep these things in mind and see how things unfold within Israel, because there is this polarization within the Israeli society. Many Israelis want a final settlement on this Palestine issue and see this as radicalizing the region, as its allies also see. But their priority is to put forward a government which will be a coalition government again with Netanyahu and his right-wing parties. But the Israeli-American connection, I think it's beginning to unravel, because more and more Americans are now realizing that a small prickly ally like Israel is dominating, as was visible when Netanyahu was invited by the US Congress, to which Obama was not all that pleased. So in that way, there are things to be watched very carefully. But after the Iran deal and how Netanyahu himself conducts, because all said and done, the Israelis are dependent on America on a variety of issues, including weapons, financial support, diplomatic support, and so on and so forth. Without America, Israel cannot survive. That is the bottom line.
Indeed, that is the bottom line. Thank you so much, Professor, for putting things into perspective for us and raising some of those very crucial aspects of the entire problem. I guess we too will have to wait and see what happens in the region. On that note, we'll move on now. The US Federal Reserve signaled an end to a prolonged period of historically low interest rates on Wednesday. In its latest statement on the health of the US economy, the central bank decided it was time to end its promise of being patient about raising interest rates. Economists now expect the interest rates could rise by June. Here's more.
At a low point since December 2008, the US federal fund rate is all set to rise. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen's address was seen to indicate this on Wednesday, although she emphasized that no decision has been made about when the hike will come.
Continued improvement in economic conditions, however, we do not want to rule out the possibility that an increase in the target range could be warranted at subsequent meetings. Let me emphasize, however, that the timing of the initial increase in the target range will depend on the committee's assessment of incoming information.
In earlier guidance, the Fed said it will be patient in considering when to bring monetary policy back to normal. On Wednesday, the word patient was dropped, which was interpreted by many to suggest that a rate hike was coming sooner rather than later. Yellen, however, repeatedly said there was no timeline for a hike.
Today's modification of our guidance should not be interpreted to mean that we have decided on the timing of that increase. In other words, just because we removed the word patient from the statement doesn't mean we're going to be impatient.
On Wednesday, U.S. stocks rallied on as market watchers believe the U.S. central bank head may have suggested a less aggressive timeline for raising interest rates. The Fed's cautious outlook on the economy also showed it remains concerned about the health of the recovery.
Forced participation rate, the percentage of working-age Americans either working or seeking work, is lower than most estimates of its trend, and wage growth remains sluggish.
In India, RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan met Finance Minister Arun Jaitley on Wednesday. News agencies quoted him as saying that the country was fully prepared to deal with the situation arising out of the Fed moves on rates. Rajan, however, did not rule out the possibility of near-term volatility in the markets, although he felt markets will be back to normal in the medium term. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Emerging markets must prepare for the impact of a rise in US interest rates. The word of caution came from International Monetary Fund Managing Director Christine Lagarde. She said that the US rate hike could both surprise the global economy in both its timing as well as pace.
IMF chief Christine Lagarde warned emerging economies of a repeat of what she called the taper tantrum of 2013. She was referring to a global market sell-off following a mere mention that the US Federal Reserve could cut its bond purchase program.
As economic conditions improve in at least some advanced economies, portfolio rebalancing out of the emerging market economies can be expected, and some volatility cannot be ruled out. So, emerging markets need to prepare for that volatility risk and this uncertainty.
In 2013, markets had turned volatile over expectations from remarks emanating from the US Fed Reserve. Lagarde said advanced economies could help cut down this risk by communicating policy intentions clearly. But she added that emerging markets could shield themselves by tackling economic vulnerabilities.
In particular, those countries with higher GDP growth, stronger external current account positions, lower inflation, and more liquid financial markets. All of that helped dampen market volatility. In addition, more resilient financial sectors contain the effect of such volatility. And the reforms that have been initiated here in India are going in the right direction, are very timely, but will also need to be pursued with utmost speed.
She added that central banks should be ready to act with both liquidity support and targeted foreign exchange interventions. The IMF chief also praised RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, stating that the IMF made a mistake by not listening to his prediction of 2018 credit crisis. Rajan was the chief economist and research director at the IMF during 2003 to 2006. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, United Nations said Islamic State fighters committed genocide against the minority Yazidi community in Iraq and carried out crimes against humanity. We'll get you the details after this short break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, a United Nations report cites evidence based on interview accounts of crimes against humanity by Islamic State terrorists. Its Human Rights Office has urged the United Nations Security Council to refer them to the International Criminal Court to prosecute the perpetrators. Many of these alleged perpetrators include foreign members of the ultra-radical insurgent group. Here's more.
The United Nations is renewing calls to prosecute Islamic State terrorists for genocide. A latest report, based on interviews with over 100 alleged victims and witnesses, say the group committed crimes against humanity, including killings, torture and abductions of women and children.
Clearly, international war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possibly genocide appear to have been committed during this conflict. The genocide part relates particularly to the Yazidis.
The UN Human Rights Council launched its inquiry in September after the terrorists, going under the names of ISIS, ISIL or IS, seized large areas in north and west Iraq. The report says Islamic State had a manifest pattern of attacks against the Yazidis, whom they see as pagans.
No community has been spared in Iraq from ISIL's violence, including the Yazidis, the Christians, Turkmen, Sabamandians, Kakai, Kurds, Shia, and indeed the Sunni.
The UN report claims 3,000 women, children and some men are in their custody. Islamic State has treated captured women and children as spoils of war, often subjecting them to rape or sexual slavery.
Witnesses reported attacks on girls as young as 6 and 9 years old. And this involved repeated rape, sexual abuse, and, as I mentioned, selling of girls and transfer of girls.
The report said Islamic Sharia courts run by the insurgents in Mosul meted out cruel punishments, including stoning and amputation. The Iraqi government has also routinely uncovered mass graves in areas recently retaken by their forces.
Consistent pattern where men and boys over the age of 14 were separated from women. They were taken to locations where they were summarily executed.
In other offences, UN investigators cite allegations that Islamic State used chlorine gas, a prohibited chemical weapon, against Iraqi soldiers in the Anbar province in September. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Tunisia on Thursday arrested 4 people in connection with the museum terror attack on Wednesday. Over 20 people were killed in the attack. 4 people have been arrested in connection with the attack and 5 others have been detained. The Tunisian president said security has been stepped up in major cities following the attack. Voices condemning the attack have come in from around the world, with Tunisia saying it is at war with terror.
4 people have been arrested in connection with the deadly attack at a museum adjoining the Tunisian parliament. 5 others have been detained. The president's office said in a statement that 4 arrested are suspected to be directly linked to Wednesday's attack. The 2 killed gunmen have also been identified, names recognized by Tunisian security as known anti-national elements. It is still not clear if they are affiliated to international terror groups. Tunisian president said that the country is in war with terror. He has also deployed army troops to major cities, stepping up security.
في العمل بتاعه أصبح داخل المدينة وأصبح يرمز ويرمي إلى رموز الدولة. العملية الإرهابية أعطيكم بسطة على الوضع النهائي باستثناء ممكن في عدد القتلى.
The international community expressed strong condemnation. The UN Secretary General called it a deplorable act. At the same time, the UN Security Council issued a statement saying no terrorist action could reverse Tunisia's path towards democracy. Tunisia is considered as the only success story of the Arab Spring. But after Wednesday's bloody attack, there is concern about country's future as a democracy.
The Secretary-General condemns in the strongest terms today's attack against the Bardo Museum in central Tunis and deplores the loss of life. He conveys his deepest condolences to the families of the victims of this deplorable act.
Hundreds of Tunisians gathered in the central Tunis for a candlelight vigil for the victims. Of the 17 tourists killed, only 2 were locals. 5 Japanese nationals and 4 Italians, besides other foreigners, were killed, underscoring once again that terror sees no boundaries. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of the other international news of the week.
European Union leaders have agreed to keep sanctions against Russia till full implementation of the Minsk agreement. The leaders didn't formally extend the sanctions that are due to expire in July, but the link to the Minsk agreement effectively extends sanctions until the end of the year, because the accord sets a number of deadlines for the end of 2015. European Council President Donald Tusk also announced progress in talks concerning the EU Energy Union, saying emphasis has to be placed on the transparency of contracts. 2 men were killed and many others injured in a gang-related shooting in a restaurant in the western Swedish city of Gothenburg. The incident has sparked fears of further escalation in gangland violence. At least 10 people were shot, 2 of them fatally, when 2 or more men entered the restaurant late on Wednesday with automatic weapons. One of the injured has life-threatening wounds and the perpetrators are still at large. Lethal showdowns between gangs have become common in Sweden over the last 2 decades. China and Japan held their first security talks in 4 years on Thursday and agreed to keep alive and foster a nascent recovery in bilateral ties following recent tensions over territorial and historical issues. The world's second and third largest economies, however, failed to set a timetable for the implementation of a scheme designed to ensure real-time communication between their armed forces. The relations between the two have chilled over what China views as Japan's reluctancy to properly redress for its wartime past, as well as a dispute over a group of tiny East China Sea islets. Pope Francis, an outspoken advocate for the rights of the poor, will visit the United Nations during its annual conclave of world leaders in September. He will be the 4th Pope to visit the United Nations in its 70-year history. A statement issued by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's office said the Pope would meet with Ban Ki-moon, hold a town hall meeting with the United Nations staff, and address the broader membership of the General Assembly. The Pope's visit is scheduled for September 25th, a day after he addresses the Congress in Washington.
Shifting focus now, it's time to bring you up to speed with all the sports news that you might have missed this week. Here's our sports wrap. Barcelona sent Manchester City crashing out of the Champions League as no team from the Premier League advanced to the last 8 for the second time in 3 seasons. Argentina football team captain Lionel Messi set up Ivan Rakitic just after the half-hour mark, and the Croat lobbed Joe Hart for a first-half goal. The goal saw Barca advancing to the quarter-final stage in the Champions League with a 3-1 aggregate win over City, as the Spanish league club was already leading 2-1 from the first leg of the last 16 tie. Portugal football team captain Cristiano Ronaldo is reportedly set to join Major League Soccer in the summer of 2018. US media has reported that sources close to the Real Madrid superstar have revealed that he plans to join the US Professional League once his current contract ends in 2018, although it is far from guaranteed. Should Ronaldo join MLS, he would prefer to play in New York, which has 2 teams, Los Angeles, which is soon to have 2 teams, or Miami, which is expected to have a team by 2018. The winner's belt in the much-anticipated bout between unbeaten US boxing champion Floyd Mayweather and Filipino boxer and politician Manny Pacquiao is worth a whopping $1 million. The World Boxing Council didn't want just any old championship belt to be handed out to the winner of this bout, so they decided to make 2 belts, an onyx version and an emerald version, and a fan vote on their website determined that the latter of the 2 would be delivered to the winner. In a tight voting contest, the emerald belt won with 53% of the vote. Moving on now, here's a look at what's creating a buzz in the world of show business. Here's our entertainment roundup.
A new live-action version of Cinderella has become the latest jewel in Disney's crown after it topped the US box office in its first week of release. The film, directed by Sir Kenneth Branagh and starring British actors Lily James and Richard Madden, earned $70.1 million over the opening weekend. The success of Cinderella replicates that of previous Disney live-action films, including Maleficent. Cinderella follows the box office lead of Into the Woods, based on the Stephen Sondheim musical, which made more than $173 million worldwide to date. Oscar-winning actress Emma Thompson has joined the cast of Disney's live-action take on Beauty and the Beast. The star will play Mrs. Potts, the housekeeper magically transformed into a teapot that Dame Angela Lansbury voiced in the 1991 animated version of the film. Fellow Oscar winner Kevin Kline has also signed on to play Maurice, the father of the Beauty character Bella. The film will be released in US cinemas on 17th of March 2017. It was announced in January that Harry Potter star Emma Watson had been cast as Bella. Cult 90s film The Crow will be remade at the Pinewood Studios in Cardiff. It will be the first multi-million-pound A-list film to get made at the new facility on the outskirts of the Welsh capital. The original film starred Brandon Lee, who died on set after being accidentally shot. First Minister Carwyn Jones made the announcement while visiting the studios as Pinewood marks its first year in Wales. The new film will draw on the Welsh government's £30 million media investment budget, which has already been used to help fund the film takedown.
New York City's Fifth Avenue was awash with Irish pride as the nation's largest and oldest St. Patrick's Day parade stepped off on Tuesday. The Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, was this year's parade Grand Marshal. He buoyantly greeted the crowd as he walked up the street to St. Patrick's Cathedral, from where he watched the parade march by. I'm going to leave you with the visuals of the parade. See you again next time.